Inside all of us there is a door. Who or what we let in makes all the difference. Exit Darcus, Chapter 1. Trespassing. Alice rested on the grass verge. The tall, wild stems cushioned her weary body. She flinched as a large spider scurried through the layers of her black organza skirt. Squelch. Her nimble fingers crushed its fat body between the netting. Grasping a nearby dock leaf, she brushed off the gooey mass. Time was unimportant. She was heading nowhere in particular. She ran her pale hand over a poisonous bouquet of toxic wildflowers. They lay beside her, loosely tied in a velvet ribbon taken from her raven hair. Oh, the delight of picking them along the wayside. Hemlock, foxgloves, nightshades. Alice smiled to herself as she studied them. Having deliberately searched for the deadly flora, they made a fine collection of all she had been forbidden to touch as a child. Sighing, she fell back onto the verdant carpet and into a troubled sleep. A shrill, piercing cry broke the silence. She awoke startled and anxious. A barn owl screeched eerily into the midnight air. Bright, stark moonlight made the limbs of the surrounding trees appear as spindly bones. Her dreams had been bizarre and oppressive. The caustic voice of her mum's boyfriend burnt like acid in her ears. "Get the hell out of here, Alice. Get lost." And that's exactly what she had done. Allowing herself brief reflection, she questioned her mother's sanity. Where was Mum's head at bringing that weak, stupid loser into their lives? Curse the night he had staggered back from the 3 castles and wormed his way into Mum's bed. When Alice had gone down to breakfast the following morning, she had been shocked to discover this scruffy, bleary-eyed biker slurping black coffee from her favourite mug. He smelled of stale lager and dope, fused with cheap, greasy bacon. Jimmy Griffin. She nursed the hatred she felt towards him with great relish. In less than 3 months, he had completely taken over the cottage that she had called home for 18 years. It was not only his jungle of pot plants that had forced their way in. His domineering ways held a chokehold over her mother. Somehow, he had captured her affection so tightly that she'd become oblivious to everything and everyone else around her. It was as if she'd been hypnotised by him. Alice suddenly felt a deep pang of gnawing hunger. It wasn't just for food. The loneliness within her had driven her to forage into dark realms for comfort and companionship. Fumbling for her flowers, she arose and hastened down to the brook, where Vanda, her Irish cob, stood tethered to an old oak tree. She mounted the steps of her gypsy caravan and carefully opened the lid of a small glazed jar. Reaching in, she lifted out some weed. Presently, a waft of marijuana smoke rose into the night air. A short-lived sense of peace and well-being calmed Alice's aggravated thoughts as she sat in the doorway, counting the fading stars. The misty morning caused a veil to hang over the brook. Alice untangled the leather thongs of her bohemian sandals and dipped her feet into the cool water. She glanced down at her right ankle. It had been feeling itchy and dry. 2 weeks had passed since the hot scratching of the tattoo artist's needle had etched in her birth sign. Now it encircled her flesh as a delicate bracelet of calligraphy laced with tiny ivy leaves. She gathered a handful of comfrey and tossed the broad foliage into Vanda's wooden bucket. The herbs would relieve her horse's tired legs. Assessing her circumstances, she decided to linger indefinitely, safely concealed within a wooded area on the vast grounds of the Beulah estate. She had wilfully driven her caravan beyond the ancient granite boundary stones and through the gateway, despite the sign clearly indicating that trespassers were prohibited. Melantha, the manager at the Three Castles, had often gossiped about the fact that Mr. Brunswick, the owner of Beulah, was absent, and many believed he would never return. His large property had fallen into disrepair, and the men he had hired to maintain his grounds were unaccountable and seldom there. Stringing a piece of rope between two silver birch trees, Alice created a washing line. The distinctive white peeling bark reminded her of times when she had walked for miles through the countryside with her mother. Always educating her in the ways of myth and folklore, she had laughed, saying, "Alice, your grandma told me birch protects us from evil spirits, but I believe it symbolises love." Anger arose as she lamented her mother's dippy, irrational behaviour. When it came to the affairs of the heart, she was absurdly impulsive, dragging any old bloke into her illusion of romance. Soon, a striking array of quirky garments spread artfully out across the rope. It made for a pretty sight. Vintage fabrics with lace trim, soft pastel chiffons, dark purple cottons, and a black net petticoat hung in the warm breeze. The rest of the day was spent knitting and baking chapatis on a small wood burner in the caravan. As evening fell, Alice sat outside eating a truckle of cheese and drinking a bottle of Jimmy's homemade wine. The fact that she had stolen it from him made it taste all the sweeter. It was midsummer, and a solar-powered Moroccan lantern had been soaking up the day's heat. Its stained glass panels transformed the captured sunlight into a mesmerising display. Lifting it off a metal stake, she climbed over the ledge of the van. In the warm glow of the lamp, she undressed and put on a satin chemise. A double bed lay chest height across the back of the wagon. It was accessed by a short ladder. Alice hopped up and sank into the welcoming mattress. Dried bunches of lavender hung overhead and provided an instant calming effect. For a few precious hours, her inner turmoil was relieved as she drifted off to sleep. Early dawn rays filtered through voile panels and danced around the rustic wooden chamber. Stirring, Alice parted the canopy and clambered down from the bunk. It wasn't long before the aroma of fresh coffee started to revive her. Having washed in the brook, she returned to plan the day ahead. Today she would explore. Lifting an antique hand mirror, she smudged kohl around her hazel eyes. A touch of gloss softened her lips. She pulled her organza skirt over her slender form and threaded the eyelets of her corset-style blouse. Fastening her sandals, she slipped out into the morning sunshine. A simple bridge of 13 stepping stones allowed her safe passage across a natural watercourse. In front of her rose a steep grassy slope. Multitudes of emerald blades moved in the breeze like soft rippling waves. Slowly ascending, she breathed in shallow gulps of flowery air. The challenge of reaching the top was generously rewarded by the vista that opened up before her. Sweet meadows, rolling hills, and a long way in the distance the faint grey roof of the House of Beulah. As she came across an old track, Alice's tired legs welcomed the level ground. A wooded area on one side provided shade in its cool shadows. But the glimpse of Beulah had unnerved her. Anxious thoughts began to spiral. An accelerating panic forced a strong image to the forefront of her mind. There, as if seated upon a throne, sat Melantha. Melantha, quick-witted yet mysterious, the resident manager of the Three Castles, had led an eclectic life. A skilled musician with a fine, haunting voice, she had performed at many festivals with her folk band Fairy Fae. Her exquisite needlework had earned her much acclaim and led to her opening a small, exclusive city boutique clothing the rich and famous. A long string of broken relationships had driven her to seek refuge in a more concealed rural lifestyle. Damaged and bruised, no one ever gained access into the vault in which she'd buried her heart. Although on the surface she quipped and played along with the locals who frequented the pub, she secretly despised them.